The docking bay of Nexus Station hummed with the endless rhythm of commerce, a symphony of beeping scanners, hissing hydraulics, and the incomprehensible chatter of 1,000 alien species conducting business at light speed. Vex Tahira stood at the central terminal, her translucent purple-blue skin catching the harsh fluorescent lights like fractured amethyst. She was barely visible behind the holographic display screens, which seemed fitting. Most of the time, people looked right through her anyway. "Status report on Bay 17, barked Kale, her supervisor, a towering Vorn whose exoskeleton clicked with each movement. He didn't even glance in her direction, directing his question to the air in general, as though Vex might be invisible. "Incoming cargo hauler is experiencing pressure regulation failures in the docking collar," Vex replied, her voice soft but precise. She'd pulled the diagnostic data 3 minutes ago, already running simulations to find the optimal solution. "I recommend cyclic recalibration starting with—" "Get one of the senior techs to handle it," Kale interrupted, his massive hand gesturing her away like she was an annoying insect. "We need competent hands on this, not whatever you are." Vex bit the inside of her cheek, a habit she'd developed over the past 2 years working at the spaceport. At 3 feet 8 inches tall, with features that seemed delicate and ethereal to larger species, she was constantly mistaken for a child, or worse, dismissed as incapable simply because she didn't fit their expectations of what a skilled technician should look like. The fact that she was actually 417 years old seemed irrelevant to beings who lived their lives by the size of their bodies. She turned back to her console without argument, pulling up the secondary diagnostics. Bay 17's problem was more serious than she'd initially reported to Kale. The pressure regulation system was showing signs of a cascading failure in the entire docking network. If she didn't fix it manually, not only would the incoming hauler be damaged, but the cascade could potentially cripple 3 adjacent bays. That meant thousands of credits in damages, dozens of delayed shipments, and possibly some very angry alien merchants. Vex moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her small frame an advantage in the tightly packed maintenance corridors of the station. The older she got, the less her crystalline lineage manifested in ways that impressed people. Her semi-translucent skin could be beautiful, when people bothered to look long enough to notice the way light danced through her like water through glass. Her eyes held depths of wisdom from centuries of observation, but none of that mattered in a port where strength was measured in tonnage and stature. The maintenance tunnel leading to Bay 17 was dimly lit and quiet, a sharp contrast to the chaos above. Vex pulled herself up through the access panel, her small hands easily finding purchase on the rungs. She emerged in the mechanical heart of the docking collar, a tangle of pipes, conduits, and electromagnetic regulators all thrumming with barely contained energy. She didn't need the diagnostic tool for this. Years of experience meant she could read a faulty system like others read books. Her fingers traced the main pressure line, identifying the degradation in the secondary coupling. The device needed to be reset, recalibrated, and its internal matrix realigned. It should take 40 minutes and require the assistance of at least 2 technicians. Vex set to work alone, her movements economical and graceful. Her translucent fingers moved across panels and switches, inputting commands into the haptic interface. The system was old, probably predated her employment by several cycles, and it was stubborn. The more she worked, the more she could feel the resistance in its systems, like a puzzle that didn't want to be solved. "Come on," she whispered, pressing her hand flat against the main regulator. "Talk to me." The electromagnetic field beneath her palm hummed, resonating at a frequency that made her skin tingle. Vex closed her eyes, letting her consciousness sink into the machine the way she'd been taught by her mother decades ago, a technique dismissed as meditation by most of her species, but which Vex understood was something much older, much deeper. It was a way of listening. The fault line revealed itself to her like a thread in a tapestry. She could see it, feel it, and without quite understanding what she was doing, she reached for it with something beyond her hands. The pressure in the system began to stabilize. The coupling harmonized. The fault line, the bay doors exploded. No, not exploded. They had simply separated from their moorings, sliding open with the force of a physical push, launching outward as though struck by an invisible sledgehammer. Alarms screamed to life across the entire facility. Emergency klaxons wailed through every corridor. And Vex found herself standing in the ruins of her careful work, staring at her own trembling hands, unable to comprehend what she'd just done. The incoming cargo hauler, now suddenly unmoored by the opening of the collision barriers, swung wildly. Someone was going to die. Multiple someones. The collision would tear through the pressurized integrity of the entire station section. A human figure emerged from the maintenance tunnel below her, moving with practiced athleticism and impossible speed. He was tall by human standards. She'd seen enough of his kind in the spaceport to know this was roughly 6 feet of muscle and determination. His dark hair caught the emergency lighting, and his sharp gray eyes assessed the situation in seconds. Without hesitation, he leaped for the cargo hauler's control arm, an impossible distance that should have resulted in his death. Instead, he grabbed it, using his own weight and leverage to slow the massive vessel's swing. For a heartbeat that felt like forever, he hung there, muscles straining against physics itself. Manual override. He shouted upward, toward the control center. "Someone get me the already done," Vex heard herself say. She didn't remember moving. She didn't remember how she got to the control terminal. But her hands were on the haptic interface, and this time she understood exactly what she was doing. She reached into the electromagnetic systems, not with confusion, but with purpose. The bay's magnetic locks engaged. The cargo hauler's stabilizers activated. The collision barriers reformed, sealing the chamber safely. The human hung suspended for another moment, then dropped to the floor with a grunt. He was breathing hard, his uniform marking him as a temporary contractor rather than station staff. Their eyes met across the damaged bay, and in that single instant of connection, Vex felt something she hadn't experienced in centuries. She had been seen, not dismissed. Not overlooked, seen. His lips curved into a slight smile, and despite the alarm still screaming around them and the chaos erupting across the station, Vex felt her translucent skin flush a deeper shade of blue. "That was incredible," the human said, his voice carrying an accent she couldn't quite place. "What's your name?" "Vex," she answered quietly. "Vex Tahira." "Marcus," he replied, straightening his uniform. "Marcus Valor, and I think you just saved about 300 lives." The emergency services were already arriving, and within minutes the bay was swarming with officials. But Marcus never took his eyes off Vex, and she found herself unable to look away. Neither of them noticed the security camera in the corner of the bay, or the way its light blinked red as someone, somewhere, began recording. The safe house was nothing like Vex imagined a resistance hideout would be. She'd expected something dark and claustrophobic, filled with paranoid soldiers and weapons. Instead, the abandoned textile factory on the outer rim of Kepler Station was almost peaceful, converted into a sanctuary with hydroponic gardens, soft lighting, and the kind of careful organization that spoke of people who had learned to build lives in the margins of society. Marcus guided her through the corridors with a hand at the small of her back, a gesture that sent warmth cascading through her translucent frame. They'd been running for 6 hours since the incident at the docking bay, moving through maintenance tunnels and service corridors, avoiding security sweeps that seemed to multiply with every passing moment. The surveillance feeds from Bay 17 went public, Marcus had explained as they fled. "What you did, that wasn't normal tech repair. Someone noticed, someone very dangerous noticed, that someone had a name, Castellan Thorne, head of the Dominion's Genetic Assets Division." Within an hour of the incident, Vex's employment file had been flagged, her residence sealed, and kill-on-site orders issued under the guise of protection for a potential biological hazard. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent 400 years trying not to be noticed, and it took one moment of genuine fear to expose her entirely. "This way," Marcus said softly, leading her into what appeared to be a communal living space. Several people were gathered around a holographic display, their faces etched with concern. They looked up as Marcus entered, their expressions shifting immediately to a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Everyone, this is Vex Tahira," Marcus announced. "The Crystallian from Bay 17. Vex, these are your people now, at least until we figure out what to do." An older woman with silver-streaked hair and kind brown eyes stood first. Her name was Isolde, Marcus explained, and she served as something like the heart of their operation. Unlike the others, humans, 2 merchants, and a scarred Threnian whose posture suggested military background, Isolde regarded Vex without suspicion or awe. She simply smiled as though welcoming a long-lost friend. "You must be terrified," Isolde said, gesturing to a chair. "Come sit. I'll have someone bring you water." Or would you prefer something else? I'm afraid our resources are limited, but we do our best. Vex found herself seated before she quite realized it was happening. A cup of something warm and fragrant pressed into her trembling hands. The kindness was almost worse than the fear. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to understand how her quiet life of technical obscurity had transformed into this nightmare. Why am I here? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not a soldier. I'm not anyone important. I just fix machines. Marcus knelt beside her chair, his gray eyes serious. You did something impossible in that bay, Vex. Something that shouldn't be possible according to every biological database the Dominion maintains. That makes you the most important person on this station right now. To them and to us. We've been hunting for someone like you, a younger man said, stepping forward. His name was Theron, and he had the bearing of someone accustomed to command. The Dominion has been conducting genetic experiments for decades, trying to develop telekinetic capabilities in various species. They believe consciousness can be weaponized, controlled, weaponized. You're living proof that the ability exists naturally, and without their manipulation. Vex's hands began to shake. Telekinesis, that's what she'd done, what she'd somehow always been, capable of doing without understanding it. Her mother had called it reaching, a meditation technique passed down through their family line. Vex had assumed it was spiritual, philosophical. She'd never imagined it was literal. My mother, Vex breathed. She told me stories about our ancestors. The Keepers, she called them. I thought they were myths. Isolde sat across from her, leaning forward with intensity. They weren't myths, dear girl. They were suppressed. The Dominion's predecessors, the old regime, discovered that Crystallians possessed inherent psychic abilities. Rather than study them peacefully or allow them to flourish, they tried to weaponize them. When the early attempts resulted in uncontrollable outcomes, they passed laws. Limits on Crystallian immigration, restrictions on reproduction rights, propaganda campaigns painting your kind as unstable. Your mother was one of the last to resist, Marcus added quietly. She refused to register her abilities or allow them to be tested. That's why she kept you hidden, raised you in technical fields, encouraged you to be invisible. The realization hit Vex like a physical blow. All her life, she'd thought her mother's warnings about keeping quiet, staying small, drawing no attention were about cultural humility or personality. They'd been about survival. Her mother had spent centuries protecting her from a threat Vex had never known existed. How do you know so much about my family? Vex demanded, looking between Marcus and Isolde. Marcus exchanged a glance with Isolde, some silent communication passing between them. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of confession. Because I was assigned to watch you 3 months ago. The Dominion, or rather, the branch of it I worked for, had flagged all remaining Crystallians for observation. We were looking for any signs of latent psychic activity. When you didn't show any unusual signatures, you were deprioritized. I was supposed to report on you weekly and move on. Vex felt something crack in her chest. You were working for them. I was, Marcus said, his jaw clenching. Until I started actually paying attention to you. Until I saw how hard you worked, how brilliant you were despite being constantly undermined. And until I started reading the classified files about what the Dominion does with psychic assets once they identify them. He stood, pacing away as if the knowledge burned inside him. They don't nurture the ability, Vex. They don't study it with any intention of coexistence. They harvest it. They strip it from the host organism and attempt to replicate it artificially, using genetic material and neural implants to create soldiers that can be controlled remotely. The process is lethal. Subjects rarely survive the extraction. The room felt suddenly too small. Vex's breathing became shallow. Then what happens to me? Nothing, Theron said firmly. Because you're under our protection now. The Dominion surveillance network just crashed. We have people on the inside who helped facilitate that. Your file has been partially corrupted. They'll send operatives looking, but it will take them time to locate you. Which means we have maybe 48 hours to figure out what you actually are and decide our next move. There is no we in what I am, Vex said sharply, standing up so quickly her chair clattered backward. I'm one person. I fix machines. I meditate. I exist quietly. I don't want to be a weapon, and I don't want to be a symbol. I know, Marcus said, moving toward her. That's exactly why we need you. He reached out, his large human hand hovering near hers, asking rather than demanding permission. After a long moment, Vex let her translucent fingers brush against his palm. The contact sent a cascade of emotions through her. Fear and safety, uncertainty and trust. Desire and vulnerability all mingled together in a way she didn't know how to process. "Tell me the truth," she whispered. "All of it. Who you really are. What you want from me. Why you're helping me." Marcus led her to a quieter room, away from the others. It was small and spare, probably a dormitory of some kind, with only a narrow bed and a single window showing the curve of the planet beyond. He closed the door behind them, ensuring privacy. "My name really is Marcus Valor," he began, his voice low and serious. "I was born on the outer colony of Meridian, settled by humans and a few other species the Dominion considers rebellious. My parents were scientists, xenobiologists who believed consciousness should be studied, not controlled. When I was 16, Dominion operatives came to our colony and arrested them for unauthorized research into non-terrestrial cognition. I never saw them again." He moved to the window, his reflection ghostly in the dark glass. "I joined the Dominion's intelligence service because I wanted to understand the system from inside. I wanted to find a way to stop them. After 9 years of working their way, I finally got close enough to see the scope of what they're doing. And then I was assigned to observe a small crystalline tech who kept her head down and never caused any trouble. And then I caused trouble," Vex said softly. "You showed them the truth," Marcus corrected, turning to face her. "You showed me the truth. You showed me that resistance isn't always loud or militant. Sometimes the most powerful thing someone can do is simply refuse to be less than they are." He stepped closer, and Vex found herself unable to move away. At 3 feet 8 inches, she was accustomed to looking up at most beings. But something about Marcus's expression, the way he looked at her like she was equal in every way, made the height difference feel irrelevant. "So what's the truth about you?" Vex asked. "What do you actually want?" "I want to help you survive," Marcus said. "I want to help you understand what you are, because I think you're remarkable. And if I'm being completely honest," he reached up, his fingers tracing a gentle path along her translucent cheek, "I want to know if what I felt the moment I saw you in that bay was real, or just adrenaline and gratitude." Vex's skin flushed deeper purple, a reaction she couldn't control. Among her kind, this kind of directness. The transport ship shuddered as it cut through Nephra's upper atmosphere, its heat shields glowing amber against the friction of re-entry. Vex gripped the armrest of her seat, her translucent fingers pressing so hard against the metal that her skin momentarily turned opaque white. She'd never been off-world before, never left the familiar confines of Kepler Station. The sensation of gravity shifting beneath her was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "First time in deep space?" asked a voice from across the narrow cabin. Vex glanced over to see a young merchant woman with iridescent scales that shifted through every color of the spectrum. Her name was Kessid, and she was one of Isolde's operatives, a pilot who'd been flying Resistance members to safety for the past 3 years. Her smile was reassuring, though her eyes held the sharp awareness of someone who'd learned to survive in dangerous places. "Is it obvious?" Vex replied, trying to steady her breathing. "Only because you look like you're about to phase through that armrest," Kessid laughed. "Don't worry. Nephra's atmosphere is actually more stable than Kepler. The real trick is the wildlife. Trust me, you don't want to meet any of the local fauna without protection." Marcus appeared from the cockpit, moving easily despite the turbulence. He'd changed since they'd left the safe house. His formal Dominion uniform replaced with practical travel gear that emphasized the lean muscle beneath. He looked younger somehow, less burdened, though Vex knew that was illusory. The weight of their situation hadn't lessened. If anything, it had intensified. "We're descending into the Shattered Forests region," he said, settling into the seat beside Vex. His thigh brushed hers, and she felt the familiar warmth spread through her body. Over the past 2 days of preparation, they'd maintained careful distance in front of the others. But alone in the transport's dim cabin, with Kessid focused on flying and the other team members dozing in their seats, Marcus allowed his hand to find Vex's. His touch was warm, so much warmer than her own perpetually cool crystalline skin. She'd learned that humans ran hot, that their bodies operated at a higher temperature than most other species. It made physical contact with Marcus feel like pressing herself against a living star. "How long until we land?" Vex asked, not because she particularly cared about the timeline, but because she needed something to focus on besides the way her heart was racing at his proximity. 20 minutes, Marcus replied, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. There's a research facility about 5 kilometers into the forest, abandoned, according to Isolde's intelligence. We'll set up base there, while the team works on cracking the Dominion's encryption codes. Theron believes they're keeping genetic records on their experiments. If we can access those files, we might find information about your mother, your family line, the source of your abilities, Vex nodded, though her attention kept drifting to the window where Nephira's surface was becoming increasingly visible. The planet was nothing like Kepler Station. Instead of the sterile geometrics of human architecture or the organic curves of merchant design, Nephira was wild. Forests of trees with crystalline bark stretched across rolling continents, their surfaces catching light and refracting it into cascades of rainbow color. There were mountains that seemed to touch the cloud layer, and vast canyons carved by ancient rivers. It was beautiful and terrifying. The landing was surprisingly smooth. Kessid guided the transport down to a clearing that seemed impossibly small, but she maneuvered the vessel with the confidence of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. Within minutes, they were on solid ground, breathing air that tasted of ozone and growing things, so different from the recycled atmosphere of the station. The research facility was in far better condition than Vex had expected. Isolde's team of hackers had managed to remotely unlock the main doors using access codes they'd lifted from Dominion databases. Inside, emergency lighting flickered to life, revealing clean corridors and sealed labs. There was dust, certainly, and evidence of years of abandonment, but the bones of the structure were sound. This place predates the current Dominion regime, said Theron, who'd arrived with the second transport an hour after their landing. He was examining a faded institutional logo on one of the walls. I'd estimate it's about 200 years old, from the period when the Dominion was still conducting open research into psychic phenomena. Marcus led Vex through the facility while the others set up equipment and established a perimeter. The building seemed to sprawl endlessly, with dozens of sealed labs and observation chambers. Finally, they came to a room that made Vex stop dead in her tracks. It was a meditation chamber. She recognized it immediately from descriptions her mother had given her decades ago, before her mother had stopped talking about the old ways, before she'd insisted Vex focus on practical skills instead of spiritual ones. The room was circular, with a domed ceiling of transparent material that showed the forest beyond. The floor was inlaid with patterns, not geometric like human designs, but organic, flowing, representing the interconnection of all living things. "What is this place?" Marcus asked softly, respecting the reverence in her voice. "Home," Vex whispered, or what home was supposed to look like before everything changed. She moved into the center of the chamber, her translucent skin beginning to glow softly, a reaction she hadn't consciously triggered. The geometric inlays beneath her feet began to illuminate in response, reacting to her presence with a faint phosphorescence. Marcus watched from the doorway, his expression awestruck. "Your abilities, they're not just telekinetic, are they? They're connected to this place, to Crystallian culture. My mother said the Keepers, our ancestors, could perceive the world differently," Vex said, moving slowly through the space. "They didn't just see matter. They perceived energy, connection, the fundamental frequency that binds all things together. The Dominion tried to reduce it to simple kinetic force. Move this, control that, but it's so much more than that." She closed her eyes, letting her consciousness expand the way her mother had taught her, the way she'd been afraid to fully explore until now. And suddenly Nephira opened up before her awareness like a vast symphony. She could feel the forest, truly feel it. Not just the massive trees with their crystalline bark, but the millions of smaller organisms living within that ecosystem. The fungi networking beneath the soil, connecting root systems, the insects pollinating flowers, the birds nesting in branches, the vast, intricate web of life that made up the planet's biosphere, and underneath it all, a hum of fundamental energy that bound everything together. "Vex." Marcus's voice sounded distant, as though underwater. "Are you all right?" She opened her eyes, and tears were streaming down her translucent cheeks. "I can feel it all. The whole world. It's so connected, so beautiful, and the Dominion wanted to turn it into a weapon. They wanted to take this—" She gestured to the symphony of sensation filling her awareness, "and use it to control and destroy." Marcus crossed the chamber and pulled her into his arms. Vex sagged against him, overwhelmed by the magnitude of her own ability, by the loss of what her kind had been, by the weight of what she might become. "You won't become their weapon," Marcus said fiercely into her hair. "I won't let you. None of us will." They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the meditation chamber while the forest sang around them. Over the following days, Vex's understanding of her abilities deepened exponentially. With the crystalline-designed meditation chamber to work in and Marcus as her steady emotional anchor, she began to explore the boundaries of her power. She couldn't just move objects. She could sense their composition, understand their internal structure, and manipulate their elemental bonds. She could influence living things by perceiving and harmonizing with their bioelectric fields. The forest creatures that initially approached her with caution soon seemed drawn to her presence, sensing something kindred in her. There was a particular creature, a Nephiran hunter beast the locals called a Vinx, that became a regular visitor to the facility. It resembled something between a large cat and a crystalline sculpture, its body covered in fractal patterns that shifted as it moved. It should have been dangerous. The research notes they'd found in the facility's archives suggested Vinxes were apex predators, capable of taking down prey much larger than themselves. But this particular Vinx approached Vex without aggression, as though recognizing something in her that transcended the predator-prey dynamic. "I think it understands what you are," Marcus observed one evening as Vex sat outside the facility, the Vinx's massive head resting in her lap. His fingers were tracing the fractal patterns on the creature's crystalline hide, and he seemed utterly at peace despite the theoretical danger. "It recognizes the connection," Vex corrected gently. "We're made of the same fundamental energy, just expressed differently. I'm not controlling it. We're just harmonizing." Marcus settled beside her, his human warmth pressing against her cool crystalline frame. Over the days in Nephira, physical contact between them had become increasingly frequent and less constrained by caution. In the privacy of their shared quarters, they'd allowed themselves to explore the chemistry between them. Tentative kisses that had grown deeper, hands learning the landscape of each other's bodies, conversations that